So just before the video starts, I wanted to give a quick shout out to what is quite possibly the most apt sponsorship I've ever come across for Vivec. Oftentimes I'll decline, 99.9% of sponsorship deals I come across because I just don't think Raid Shadow Legends is very appropriate for the sort of content on this channel. But I know a lot of you like to fall asleep to these report videos, and that's why I thought these COZYSNUG sleep earbuds from LYTMI really are a match made in heaven for this channel and its viewers. If you're anything like me, you might struggle falling to sleep on your back with conventional earbuds in. I'd always wondered whether there were any designs that facilitated side sleeping without waking up with a perforated eardrum. Not only do these earbuds work wonders for side sleepers, they boast high quality audio, are super lightweight and soft with various different sizes of ear wings to pick and choose from, on top of having 21 hours of charge when using the charging case. So, now you can all quickly and smoothly fall asleep listening to me recount the usual litany of mind-bending, reality-shattering experiences that we all know and love. If you're interested, please check out the link in the description, and don't forget to use the discount code Vivec for 10% off your order, valid up until the 9th of December. Anyway, we'll crack on with the video now, but be sure to let me know what you thought of the earbuds if you do end up snatching yourself a pair, and thank you to LYTMI for reaching out, I really appreciate it. The horror. The horror. A mushroom trip report by Jamshed, posted to EARBUDS.org December 1st, 2004. I initially woke up with the thought of taking a psychedelic on that very day. All of the days which I woke up like this ended up with a spectacular trip. I was planning on taking a psychedelic to celebrate the successful completion of a 7-week spiritual working. For those who know, I was working with the Olympic spirits from the Arbatel. I had abstained from all substances for more than a month, save for a couple of bowls and a beer spread out across the period. The day started out as very gloomy and rainy. Don't get me wrong, I love rain, but this day was dark and cold, and the rain did not help much. My plan was to take the psychedelic outdoors in some park, away from people. I was originally torn between 2CT7 and mushrooms, both of which I had never tried before. In the evening the sky cleared, but it remained too cold to allow for an outdoors trip. So, I chose the mushrooms, for their shorter duration, and for the fact that I can easily procure more if this trip was bad, whereas the dose of 2CT7 that I had could very well be the last 25mg of 2CT7 that I will ever see. Therefore, I decided to save the T7 for the perfect occasion. The problem is that I underestimated the mushrooms for 2 reasons. The first being that I imagined, due to my spiritual background and my experiences, all beautiful, with the sacred DPT, that it would be hard for me to even have a bad trip, since DPT is a mammoth of a psychedelic which I do handle very well, and the people I know who took mushrooms seem to imply that it was a rather easy trip. The second reason was that I didn't think that 3.5 grams of mushrooms would do much to me at all, since I've had a high natural tolerance to all tryptamines I've tried. Some background. I live with my parents, who would not appreciate their son doing drugs. They are aware of my spiritual practices and are tolerant of them, so I had that on my side. I'd always been able to take psychedelics with or without their presence, and get away with it without them suspecting that I am under the influence. This happened in that the psychedelic is either short-acting, like DPT, or long-acting, but does not cause much impairment or confusion, like 2CE, or a combination of both, like 2CD. Almost 2 years before this experience, I took 500 morning glory seeds on one occasion, and went into a severe vomiting fit that scared me, turning my trip very, very bad. I eventually had to turn to my parents for emotional help, and I was lucky they were understanding when I explained that it was a part of my spiritual progress, and it was. The moral here though is that you should not underestimate the importance of a trip sitter. I've found parents are not very good with this role. In my morning glory seed experience, I managed to somehow convince them that I was not poisoned. As you will see in this report, I put my parents in a very stressful situation, and I feel it was very selfish of me to do so. Read on. The 3.5 grams were made up of 4 stems, 1 cap, and 1 unopened cap attached to one of the stems, a terminal which I have been told contains more psilocybin than opened ones. They all had blue stains on them. They were all eaten between 5 PM and 5:10 PM. They didn't smell bad at all. In fact, they smelt somewhat exotic. The taste wasn't very encouraging, but it was bearable. I actually felt an alert as I was finishing eating the last stem. I walked around and was beginning to notice that movement was becoming typically more fluid. I then had a meal which took me 45 minutes into the trip. I was now definitely feeling off baseline. From then, I began to develop some anxiety. As time progressed, I became a little uncoordinated and the anxiety grew. I really did not know why I was having so much anxiety. The psychedelic effects were not new to me at all, yet I was actually scared. A big thing my mind fixed on was that my mother would be able to tell that I'm on drugs because of my lack of coordination, and as my thoughts were beginning to get jumbled, I imagined I won't be able to interact clearly with her. I decided to take 0.5 milligrams of alprazolam because I was now sure that I was bound for a bad trip. I didn't care if it diminishes the psychedelic effects, I was just desperate to get out of this discomfort. I go to lie down and find myself shivering. I didn't know if it was the cold or my anxiety, but I get under the covers and still shivered severely. The problem is that I was not exactly intensely tripping, I was simply very confused and had irrational anxiety, and I did not like it. I was also feeling an uncomfortable body load that reminded me a lot of 5-MeO-DMT, and I did not like this whatsoever. With that, and despite the alprazolam, the anxiety grew and grew and grew. I figure I was now at the 2-hour mark. I was experiencing nothing but pure terror. I was literally afraid of everything, including myself. Actually, the one thing that frightened me most was fear itself. I had no real reason to be afraid, and yet I was. It certainly was not ego death that scared me. I had my ego dissolved in the divine ocean of milk on DPT, while the world shattered many times before, and I have taken on other alien personalities on ketamine at one point. Therefore, I knew my fear was not out of some kind of identity crisis. Yet I was afraid of being afraid, and also afraid of the fact that the alprazolam did absolutely nothing. Later I learned that 0.5 milligrams might not be enough, even though I didn't have much tolerance to the drug. I decided to seek help by talking to friends. I went on MSN. I waited for it to sign on, looked at the window, and saw a matrix of multicolored dots. It was an interesting visual that persisted for a while. All the dots were mathematically perfect in size and arrangement. I also had a hard time typing because letters on the screen all had this red electricity buzzing around them, and I had very bad coordination. I found only 2 of my friends online, and both were geographically far, far away. One of them told me not to self-medicate with alprazolam, since it could be a potentially dangerous combination. Now, I know that the most commonly used as a safe cure for bad trips is benzodiazepines, but at this moment, since I was so afraid of everything, I took his word for it. This experience of fear reminded me of how pathetic I was. I told this to the second friend. He simply told me what a good person he thought I was and that I didn't deserve all the crap that I went through this year. I found his comment extremely nice and began to cry. I go to lie down and cry even more. It was a catharsis of sorts for a very bad year I had. Mind you, I had been doing better for the last couple of months compared to the rest of the year, which was a very difficult one indeed. However, I have a tendency to suppress, but not repress, negative emotions. I'm guessing that what this trip did was simply release these suppressions and breaking the dam. I experienced a year's worth of anxiety and despair in 6 hours. Now that it was about the 4th hour, I was lying down, occasionally crying. The time between hour 3 and hour 5 seems to be a blur. I lost track of it and do not remember all that happened, but much of it was spent lying down. I did not listen to music, since I was afraid to listen to music. I didn't get up, since I was afraid of getting up. I just remember crying a lot, feeling sorry for myself, which is something I don't normally do. The trip took a distinct sine wave form. I got periods of extreme euphoria and an opiate-like body feeling, followed by the aforementioned fear with a lot of shivering and tension. The positive points, though fewer than the negative ones, were very significant. I remember the first peak. I was lying down, my body twisted, my eyes and mouth wide open, staring at the ceiling with a feeling of immense wonder. The ceiling was no longer a ceiling. I honestly don't know what it was. Perhaps a white sky with multicolored stars and streams that kept moving. I remember staring at the light. I distinctly remember seeing a lot of green eye murals, think of Alex Gray's artwork. They were flying out of the light, swirling around it, all in geometrical perfection. Since I was afraid of closing my eyes, the few closed-eye visuals that I saw were faint and chaotic. After that euphoric peak came another fit of terror, and that was followed by a sense of, well, this is it. My body felt like it was dying, and I truly believed that I was somehow dying. In fact, I think this is what the big problem was. My ego did not die for some reason. I maintained my ego as I lost control amongst a lot of confusion and anxiety, and I do not know why. Perhaps I did not want to let go because I knew I still had a long trip ahead of me and did not want my mother to see me in that state and freak out. I also needed someone to be with me, but I had no one to contact. My only friend nearby was busy that day. Plus, as I thought of all the people I know, I became afraid of all of them and found I had no one to trust. I felt like I could trust nobody at all. And because my ego remained, I went into a rather psychotic state. I started crying and masturbating at the same time for some reason. Of course, the masturbation didn't do much due to the state I was in. I know for a fact that at this point I was just overflowing with love towards everyone, which is paradoxical with the fear. I felt like nothing mattered, but unlike the exhaled form of the same feeling I get with DPT after ego annihilation, here my ego was there and I knew that I was going insane. And for the first time ever on a psychedelic, I actually forgot that I took a drug. Actually, I didn't forget, it just somehow ceased to be relevant. I was convinced that I was going to be eternally insane. This insanity extended between two lows of terror and one peak of euphoria. During this one peak, I felt God intoxicated like I do with DPT. I felt like I had superhuman powers in the moment. I had many twisted thoughts, including the idea of walking outside naked in public. Now, it was back to raining, almost a storm. Well, I felt this because nothing mattered, and now I've become God and will die very soon. However, in spite of this insanity, I did have a grain of reasoning left in myself. I told myself to stay still and as silent as possible, and that this would be my best way out. As these thoughts persisted, the terror remained, and instead of God, I was now possessed by paranoia. I stumbled into the bathroom because I needed to pee. My vision was blurry, and I seemed to have had some nystagmus. As I was in the bathroom, I felt the same painful terror I felt throughout the trip. I was debating whether or not to go tell my mother. I figured since the original source of anxiety was my fear of my mother seeing me in that state, perhaps confronting her about it will resolve the anxiety. And so, I stumbled down the stairs and into the living room where she was sitting. I barely made it to the couch where I fell on it. I was completely paralysed. I remember hearing my mother freaking out, calling my name and asking what was wrong. I then remember seeing nothing. Not black nor white, nothing. I saw nothingness. I was stuck in a moment where the divine and I were one. I saw nothing, heard nothing, and felt nothing. I then had a whiteout. This has happened to me before on 2 previous occasions. I saw whiteness everywhere, whether my eyes are open or closed. Eventually, I came back. I saw my mother holding my limp body and crying. I told her I was alright, and she said she thought I'd died. The whiteness dissipated into many hues of different colours, and again the eye murals that covered everything had quickly disappeared. It took me only a few minutes to recover from that state and reach a level very close to baseline, and I still do not know how this is possible. With most psychedelics, you actually climb, peak, and then slowly recover baseline. Here, I spent 5 hours climbing, peaked at the 6th, and quickly returned to baseline in almost half an hour. I suspect now that it was less from the drug action, and more from the psycho-spiritual reaction. As I came to, I simply told my mother that I was on morning glory seeds again, and it was not hard to explain. I was then able to open up emotionally with my mother. I'd had problems connecting emotionally to my parents for the past few years. I loved them, of course, but could not express it, and felt very guilty about that. I was now able to very openly talk to my mother, and later my father when he came home. And I managed to talk to them about many serious, outstanding issues that I had. There were 2 things my parents wanted me to do for my future that I was very afraid of and previously could not do. The day after my trip, I found myself easily starting with them without fear and happy at the fact that I'm finally doing something that I know will make my parents happy after all they have done for me. I would say that I've never felt so much fear in my life as I had during that trip. I really did not enjoy it at all. And yet at the end, it was sort of worth it. The only thing I regret is putting my mother in such a stressful position, but even that has shown me that she really does care for me. I did have suicidal ideas before, but now I would never do this and put my mother in that situation for real. I simply cannot cope with this guilt. Although I said I will never touch mushrooms again during the trip, I now think I might consider taking them in a few years' time. However, it must be said that they definitely deserve much more respect than they are given on the street.